Hey everyone, I'm Kaya, and welcome back to We Read and Review Freely Society. If you caught my last video, you already know we're not just reading for fun, we're reading for freedom, for resistance, and for truth. Today I'm sharing the book I just checked out from the library, Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And let me tell you, Adichie doesn't write for the surface, she writes for the soul. And please forgive me if I mispronounce your name, girl. If any Nigerians could correct my pronunciation of that name, just let me know now. And this episode, we're diving into the first chapter, and trust me, it sets the tone. It's a poetic call to remember, to dream, and to reclaim. It asks us what happens when our stories are silenced. What does it mean to dream in a world that tries to strip us of imagination? In true WRRFS fashion, we're not just reviewing, we're reclaiming space to reflect, challenge, and grow. So let's crack this one open together and talk about how Dream Count, even in its opening chapter, dares us to dream boldly and why that's a radical act in itself. So let's get into it. So, first off, I just want to say that I think I'm typically going to start opening my videos with a script. And I do that because I am neurodivergent and I always feel like I need some sort of script to go off of just for the sake of clarity and conciseness and organization. I just, once again, I just want the best content for my viewers. And also, it gives you opportunity to see me reading, something more than just the book that we're reviewing. The whole point of this channel is to encourage people to read ultimately and to think critically about things that are happening in society as well, and to live liberally. If I want to read off of a script for my videos, I could do that. Thanks. I can do anything I want. The sky's the limit. And right now, I'm just sort of reading off of my laptop the notes that I took on this chapter. And I don't mean to bore you all to death. I just want to make sure that I'm touching on everything I want to touch on for this review. So this chapter was very short. It's about 14 pages long, and I know to some people that might not, seem short, but it was to me. I got through it rather quickly, I would say, in less than 40. I was able to read it in less than 45 minutes, probably even shorter than that time span I just gave you all. Um, and then this book opens with her describing the rather boring activities the character Chiamaka, and I think it's pronounced Chiamaka, but once again, my Nigerian peoples out there, correct me if I'm wrong, and also that is the title of chapter one, Chiamaka. And so yes, it opens with, I think, um, Chimamanda describing Chiamaka's character, who is describing rather boring activities she would do to fill her day when the COVID-19 pandemic began, which included napping, working out, writing, etc. And even though she doesn't like necessarily say it's the COVID-19 pandemic, I think this character is obviously supposed to represent Chimamanda herself and some of the things that she got into during the pandemic. Because for clarification, this book is supposed to be a fictional book. So these characters, while I believe that they are, maybe real characters in the author's life, they've been given different names ultimately. And I guess we're not supposed to know as the viewer or the reader whether or not these are real events that took place. And while the chapter wasn't fresh in my memory when I began writing these notes on this review, I do recall that in this chapter, Chiamaka would go on to describe the Zoom calls she would make with her family members who all felt fear and exercised caution as the pandemic progressed. Some themes in this chapter touched on feelings of despair and hope. These feelings weren't just regarding the pandemic, it also concerned issues surrounding poverty in Africa, and racist acts being committed against Africans in the UK. Essentially, this chapter described all the troubling things Chiamaka saw and heard around the world while quarantining during the pandemic that concerned her and her family. And, obviously, these are real things that, happened during the COVID-19 pandemic in real life. There was just so many bad things that was happening at the time and that are still, debatably happening. I thought this chapter had a very mellow opening and that the overall tone had this pattern of going from boring to slightly comical, to cautious to uncertain, and then it would repeat. I thought it was an interesting choice that the first chapter ends on a note of two people attempting to process and make sense of the lack of humanity in the world. It sends the message that there are just too many bad things happening in the world at once during this time, and not enough people are adequately reacting to the indignities that are being enacted against humans of all walks of life. Um, Overall, I thought the first chapter was relatable in terms of how I spent my time during the pandemic, worrying alongside friends and family while feeling anxious and a bit stir crazy during quarantine. I think it's just very interesting how she was able to intertwine, the subtle bits of racism and the subtle bits of poverty and things that all the bad things that were sort of happening in the world while this major event was happening at the forefront of things. So yeah, while everyone was worried, about the pandemic or whatever, like that was everyone's main concern, there was also all of these little bad things that were happening too that weren't necessarily related to illness or the pandemic. I think it just touches on how we view the world and, some of the things that should or would, touch on our souls a bit and everything, and would cause us to react in a way that I think some people may or may not expect, while everything I was reading was just sort of like, you would, I guess, sort of be upsetting to one person, to another person who maybe may have not been aware of some of the other things that were happening in the world that weren't, I wouldn't say necessarily small at all, because racism is such a big thing that as Africans face in the world. They may not have realized that it was happening simultaneously, so once again, once something that may be upsetting to one person may be completely and utterly shocking to another person. I just think it sort of called awareness to be cognizant that, people were during the pandemic were going through um, a lot of negative experiences during that time. Whereas, a lot of people just thought it was the one big tragic event that was a pandemic. There were other layered bad things that were happening on top of the pandemic. Obviously, while I will say, this chapter reflected the tone that Chiamaka was um, feeling during the pandemic, which was boredom. Unfortunately, I think it it was necessary to do it that way. I also thought it was an interesting choice that she did not necessarily go right into the description of Chiamaka herself. She just went directly into, I guess, her feelings mid pandemic and everything. I think that sort of sets up the scene, not in a super interesting way, but it does set up the scene saying, just like, wait, the climax will come. Okay, hold on. And I think we sort of get that hint towards the end of chapter one, going into chapter two with like some of with the description of how, one of her family members describes like a racist incident that they witnessed and everything. So, of course, that's there's more to come, and I hate to, give away any spoilers because obviously I want to encourage people to read either along with me or to read the book themselves one day. Obviously I didn't get into the details and names and things of that nature, so you should still read the book. Is these, my reviews are just very brief reviews of each chapter, and once again, it's a review. It's not telling you every single thing that's happening in the chapter. Thank you guys for sticking with me, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Also, stay tuned for more. In the next video, we're getting into chapter 2.